Hello and welcome to this demo. I would like to show you today ephemeral disks for Azure Virtual Desktops and how we can use these disks with our desktops together with Cloudpager for an awesome user experience. So here I have a virtual machine with an ephemeral disk. This is essentially a tearaway non-persistent disk. And probably the best thing about it is these disks are completely free to use. Now while this is a non-persistent disk, unlike something like maybe Citrix PVS, for example, where if you reboot the machine, it completely wipes it clean back to the base image, well, with an Azure VM using the ephemeral disk, you can actually reboot these machines and the data persists. But you cannot resize these VMs, and you also cannot shut down these machines either. This is very important to understand. You will see in Azure that you can't even shut down these VMs from the actual power controls within the Azure Resource Manager. You will instead need to delete the VM if you want to power these down, or possibly rebuild or re-image the existing VMs back to the base image. Of course, either of these options means that the data will be wiped and the machines will be set back to a base image. So that's very important to understand, that yes, the data persists when you reboot the VMs, but these VMs are essentially always on by nature because you can't shut them down. And if you do re-image them, it's going to wipe those VMs clean. And since you can't shut them down, you're more likely to actually just delete the VMs when you want to bring VMs down and then just create VMs again later. So it certainly changes what might be your typical Azure Virtual Desktop workflow. With the nature of ephemeral disks and how they are non-persistent, the fact that this is Azure Virtual Desktop means that might not be that big of a deal, because of course the agent installed in the Azure Virtual Desktops includes FSLogix, so a lot of the data that users write would typically be written to the FSLogix profile container in an Azure Virtual Desktop anyway, and administrators of AVD are used to the concept of roaming data. Of course, in addition to FSLogix profile containers, you may also choose to roam some data in OneDrive. Well, let's take a look here. So we see this desktop or virtual machine with the ephemeral OS cache placement on the ephemeral disk. And if I go over to my Azure Virtual Desktop and look at the host pool, this host pool contains that machine. So it contains this machine, and I've assigned the application, which in this instance is my desktop, to my user, and the RDP property is set to allow Azure Active Directory login. And now if I go to my desktop here, I'm going to launch my stateless desktop, which of course in my host pool I only have the one, and it's this machine with the ephemeral disk. And as I've allowed login with my Azure Active Directory, I'm going to use my Azure Active Directory credentials. And we see that login performance is pretty quick. And we see within seconds of logging in that the cloud paging player comes online and the apps are filtering in. Now I had already logged in once just to make sure that the desktop was working. So some of my applications like my MSIX and AppV applications had already cached. So that's why some of those are already appearing there. But let's go through and maybe launch some applications to see how they perform. So first we'll go to one of my MSIX applications, Mozilla Firefox. Just see how quick that is. Now you might be thinking, well, Firefox is a pretty small application, and launches pretty quick usually. I haven't done a stopwatch test, but at least my perception is that this seems to launch faster than on a regular Azure VM used for Azure Virtual Desktop. But let's go and try and launch one of my cloud paging containers now. Let's say Notepad++. And boom, instant. So now I'm going to try and launch one of my larger applications. And this one again is a cloud paging container. It is SQL Management Studio, which is slow at the best of times. Now I could have optimized the launch of this application by using what we call a prefetch for my cloud paging container that would significantly improve the launch performance. But just to try out the ephemeral disk, I wanted to try just launching this application without optimizing the launch time itself. Now while this does appear slow, SQL Management Studio by its nature is kind of slow, so that's expected. And just my perception is this is actually faster than it typically is even on my own physical device. Now at this point, just to show you again one of the differences in an ephemeral disk or a machine running with an ephemeral disk. in Task Manager, you see that the disk performance does not appear. And on the CPU and memory, everything seems to be running pretty well for me. Now I'll just go back and launch one of my other applications, my AppV application, very small one, Putty. And we can see that that performs beautifully too. And that's pretty much it for this demo. I just wanted to show that ephemeral disks, which are very performant due to low read-write latency, and which are free to use, but come with the caveat of being non-persistent when you reimage or tear away and build new VMs. I think a perfect use case for ephemeral disks is actually those multi-session Windows 10 and Windows 11 desktops in Azure Virtual Desktop. And while you can use FSLogic's profile containers and OneDrive to persist the user data to ensure you get a consistent, awesome experience with your applications, and those applications follow the users wherever they go, you can use Cloudpager for delivering those applications and getting the benefits of modern application management. Thank you.